Dr. Pierre, thank you very much for joining us to come and tell us about this new strain. Now, my understanding is that it's a newly identified strain, but it's not new. Explain that to me.
Yes, so the process of declaring a new strain would involve obtaining three different samples in different periods of time and identifying them. So what Abbott, in collaboration with global investigators, have announced recently is that we have characterized the third strain, the third sample. So what we have is HIV group M, subtype L. So the subtypes are designated alphabetically, and this is subtype L. It's the first two samples were identified from the Democratic Republic of Congo, one in the 90s and one in the 80s, and this sample was identified from the Democratic Republic of Congo in 2001, and at that time the science or the technology wasn't at the level that it could correctly characterize it, but Abbott, working with investigators, have developed new next-gen technology which is able to identify this. So we do have now the declaration of a new subtype.
So this is a frozen blood sample kept on ice since 2001. Now you've got the technology to go back to those blood samples and look at things in more detail, and you've realized there's a new strain.
Absolutely.
And it comes from the DRC.
It comes from, so a lot of the variation in HIV subtypes has been found or has been characterized from DRC, and so this one also, these samples also were collected in the DRC.
Do you know how common it is? So
we will only know, what we've done now is we're declaring that there is a new, we've met the requirements to declare a new subtype, but we'll only know how widespread it is and what its other characteristics are once we provide this technology or this intellectual property to the global scientific community, and then they start looking at old and new samples, existing samples. But it obviously has been circulating since at least the 80s, but we don't know to what extent.
Is it something to worry about? Do the current drugs treat it?
So we won't know that yet, but what it's the more information that we have about HIV and its characteristics is good news. So it's not something to worry about. But yes, in characterizing it, we will then look at how it's being diagnosed, how vaccines that would hopefully prevent HIV should be developed, and how treatment would be adjusted for this subtype, if there is any adjustment required.
I was reading an article in Scientific American in preparing for this interview, and they quote a professor at the Vaccine and Gene Therapy Institute at Oregon Health and Science University. He was not involved in this new research. His name is Jonas Sacher, and he says, quote, "This tells us the HIV epidemic is ongoing and evolving. The calling card of HIV is its diversity. That is what has defeated all of our attempts to create a vaccine." Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. So every time the HIV virus and hepatitis virus, every time they replicate, one of their real characteristics is that they change themselves ever so slightly, and that's what the virus has used to evade us having a vaccine up until this stage.
How many strains are there of HIV?
So in terms of the group M, the subtypes are being given alphabetically. So now we are at the letter L.
Right.
Yes,
so
and then there are hundreds of subtypes, but for HIV, so there's HIV1 and there's HIV2, there's group M, there's group O, different groups, and then different subtypes. So we are discovering and confirming new subtypes all the time.
So just to reassure perhaps our viewers, is it something to be alarmed about? Is it something that suggests that the virus is so varied that it's very hard to get a handle on it? It's
definitely not something to be alarmed about. It's good news. It means that the science is improving. If this is a war that we are against the HIV virus, so every bit of new information we have equips us better for the war. So it's definitely not something to be worried about. It doesn't. This discovery doesn't have any impact on people that are living with HIV and on treatment now. And we will have more information in the future as to whether this specific subtype has any characteristics that relate to say its virility, its transmissibility, or its ability to respond to treatment. But at this stage, it's not at all anything to worry about. It's good news.
And it shows that
treatment.
Science is getting a handle on just how varied this virus is and how it's mutating. How close are we to a vaccine for HIV?
So I'm not very close to that field, but I believe that what we have right now that we can work on as people either infected or not infected with HIV is that we have great diagnostics, we have excellent therapy, and we're looking at ways to prevent the transmission of the disease. And there's a lot of work that's being done around vaccines, but we don't have a go-to-market vaccine at this stage.
But the crucial thing, of course, to remind all of us is that it is now treated as a chronic disease because of the drugs that we have.
Absolutely. And so it's incumbent on people to know what their status is and to know whether they are HIV positive or negative, and manage themselves appropriately. So the testing ability to test. Abbott is one of the leaders in the diagnostic field around HIV. So there are all sorts of tests that are out there, and there's improved treatments that are being made available for everybody. So really, it's with everything that's on the table, it's really up to individuals to know their status. That is the most important thing. Know your status and manage your status appropriately.
And we're not to be alarmed by the new strain,
no,
the newly identified strain.
Not newly identified strain, but not a new strain.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Dr. Kuku Appiah, thank you very much from Abbott Pharmaceutical, joining us there to tell us all about the new strain of HIV, newly identified strain of HIV.